Nick thought his life was perfect. Career, marriage, loyal friends. But everything turned upside down when his friend Alex wrote, "We need to talk. It's about Sophie." In just a few hours, he finds out that his wife isn't just lying to him. She's hiding a much worse truth. Nick sat in his office, watching the last light of the day fade through the window. The golden glow cast a peaceful hue over the space, but inside his mind was in turmoil. His phone buzzed on the desk, and he glanced at the screen. A message from Alex, his closest friend. "We need to talk. It's about Sophie." Nick's stomach tightened. His fingers hesitated before unlocking his phone. Alex wasn't the type to be dramatic. If he said it was important, it meant something was seriously wrong. He quickly typed back, "Where?" "The Clover Bar. 30 minutes." Nick's mind raced as he grabbed his coat. Sophie, his wife, his partner for the last 6 years. What could Alex possibly have to say about her? The idea of betrayal hadn't even crossed his mind yet. But a sinking feeling in his gut told him that whatever Alex had to say, it wasn't good. The Clover Bar was a quiet spot in downtown Los Angeles, a place they had frequented over the years. Alex was already seated in a dimly lit corner, nursing a whiskey on the rocks. His face was tense, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something heavier. Nick slid into the chair across from him. "Alricht, Mann. What's going on?" Alex exhaled slowly, setting his glass down. "I wasn't sure if I should tell you this, but I figured you'd want to know. Just say it." Alex nodded, bracing himself. "I saw Sophie today, at the Fairmont Hotel." Nick frowned. "Yeah? She had a meeting downtown." "That's the thing." Alex leaned in. "She wasn't there for work, Nick. She checked into a room, but not under her name." The words hit like a slap. Nick stared at him, waiting for some sort of clarification, some logical explanation that would make this make sense. "What do you mean?" Alex pulled out his phone and scrolled for a moment before turning the screen toward Nick. A photo, grainy, taken from a distance, but undeniably clear enough. Sophie at the hotel's front desk, signing something. Nick swallowed hard. "That doesn't prove anything." "I know." Alex hesitated before adding, "but the name she used was Anna Caldwell." Nick's breath hitched. That name, he had never heard it before. "That's not possible. Why would she?" "That's what I was wondering. So I stayed to see what she was up to." Nick's pulse pounded in his ears. "And?" Alex hesitated. "She wasn't alone." Nick's grip on his glass tightened. "Who?" "A man. Early 40s. Tall, dark hair." They went upstairs together. The world seemed to tilt slightly. Sophie wasn't just meeting someone in secret. She had an alias. A hotel room. A companion. Nick's voice was low, controlled. "Are you absolutely sure?" Alex met his gaze, unwavering. "I watched them get into the elevator together, Nick." For a long moment, neither spoke. Nick felt his entire reality shift. He had trusted Sophie with everything. She had never given him a reason to doubt her. And yet, "You okay?" Alex asked quietly. Nick let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "I need to find out what the hell is going on." Alex nodded. "I figured you'd say that." He slid something across the table, a hotel key card. "I might have borrowed this from the desk while they were distracted." Nick stared at the card. Room 917. Sophie's secret. And now his. Nick sat in his car outside the Fairmont Hotel, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. The hotel keycard Alex had given him lay on the passenger seat, its weight seeming heavier than it should be. His mind raced with questions, each one more painful than the last. What the hell was Sophie doing here under a fake name? Who was the man with her? And why had she never mentioned any of this? Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the key card and stepped out of the car. His pulse hammered in his ears as he approached the grand entrance of the hotel. The lobby was dimly lit, elegant chandeliers casting golden reflections on the marble floors. He kept his head down as he walked past the reception desk, avoiding eye contact with the staff. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, and Nick stepped inside, pressing the button for the 9th floor. The ride up felt both agonizingly slow and too fast at the same time. As the numbers blinked past, he rehearsed what he would say. Would he confront her? Demand the truth? Or would he stand there, stunned, unable to process the betrayal? The doors opened, revealing a plush hallway lined with deep burgundy carpeting. He swallowed hard as he found room 917. His fingers trembled slightly as he slid the key card through the reader. A small green light blinked, followed by the soft click of the lock releasing. He pushed the door open. The room was dim, illuminated only by the faint glow from the city skyline outside. The air smelled faintly of perfume, Sophie's perfume. His chest tightened as he stepped inside. The bed was slightly unmade, the covers rumpled, as if someone had left in a hurry. On the nightstand sat 2 half-empty glasses of wine. Nick's stomach twisted. He took another step forward, scanning the room for any sign of her. Then, his eyes landed on something that made his blood run cold. A man's jacket draped over the chair. He turned his head sharply at the sound of movement in the bathroom. A muffled voice. Then, the door opened. Sophie stepped out, her long dark hair damp from the shower, wrapped in a hotel robe. She froze mid-step when she saw him, her face draining of color. Nick? His jaw clenched. So it's true. Her eyes darted to the chair, where the jacket lay. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Panic flashed across her face. Nick took a slow, deliberate step forward. Who is he, Sophie? She swallowed hard. Nick, listen, it's not what you think. Not what I think. His voice was low, filled with barely contained anger. You checked into a hotel under a fake name. You lied to me. And now, he gestured to the jacket. Do you really expect me to believe anything you say? Just then, the bathroom door swung open again, and a man stepped out. Nick's breath caught in his throat as he took in the stranger's face. He was older than Nick had expected, mid-40s, tall with sharp features and piercing gray eyes. But what unsettled Nick the most was the way the man looked at him. Calm, almost expectant. Sophie exhaled sharply, stepping between them. Nick, please, just let me explain. The man's gaze flickered to Sophie before settling back on Nick. His voice was deep, measured. I suppose this was inevitable. Nick's fists clenched. Who the hell are you? The man didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that made Nick's entire body go rigid. A police badge. Nick's world tilted. What? The man held up a hand. Detective Mark Calloway, LAPD. Nick blinked, his anger momentarily replaced by confusion. What the hell is going on? Sophie looked away, her expression tormented. Calloway sighed and tucked his badge away. We need to talk, Nick. About Sophie. And about something she's been keeping from you. Nick took a step back, shaking his head. Keeping from me? What are you talking about? Calloway exchanged a look with Sophie before saying, Your wife isn't who you think she is. A heavy silence filled the room, suffocating and thick. Nick stared at Sophie, waiting for her to deny it, to laugh it off, to tell him this was all some elaborate mistake. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, I'm sorry. Nick felt the floor drop out from under him. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was something much, much bigger. Nick's pulse pounded in his ears. The room around him blurred, his focus narrowing on Sophie and the man standing beside her. Detective Mark Calloway, LAPD. His wife wasn't who he thought she was. Nick's mind scrambled for an explanation, something rational that would make sense of the impossible. But all he had were fragments of Sophie's lies. Her fake name, the hotel, the secrecy. And now, a police detective standing in their room like this was some kind of sting operation. He took a step back. Somebody better start explaining. Sophie's eyes shimmered with something close to panic. Nick, I never wanted you to find out this way. Calloway exhaled, his expression unreadable. Sit down, Nick. Nick didn't move. His jaw tightened. I'm not sitting until someone tells me what the hell is going on. The detective exchanged a glance with Sophie before speaking. Your wife has been part of an undercover investigation for the past 2 years. Nick let out a breathy, humorless laugh. You're joking. Sophie's voice was soft. I'm not. The weight of her words sank into him like lead. His wife, his Sophie, was a cop? It didn't make sense. She worked in finance. She spent her mornings reading over contracts and analyzing numbers, not infiltrating criminal operations. Calloway stepped forward. She was assigned to get close to a target, a man named Daniel Moretti. Nick's hands clenched into fists. Who? Sophie swallowed. The man you think I was having an affair with. Nick stared at her, his thoughts spiraling. So you've been lying to me this whole time? Tears welled in her eyes. I had to. It was my job, Nick. I had to make him believe I wasn't married. I had to. Nick's laugh was bitter. So that's why you had a fake name. That's why you were in this hotel. Because you're some kind of spy. Sophie flinched at the venom in his voice. It wasn't like that. Nick turned to Calloway. And you just let this happen? Let her manipulate me? Calloway's expression hardened. She didn't manipulate you. She protected you. Nick's stomach twisted. Protected me from what? Sophie hesitated, and that hesitation chilled him to the bone. Moretti isn't just some businessman, she finally said. He's one of the top players in a criminal network trafficking weapons through Los Angeles. Nick ran a hand over his face. Jesus. He had suspicions about me, Sophie continued. That's why I had to be so careful. If he ever found out I was a cop, he wouldn't just kill me, Nick. He'd come after you too. A cold realization settled over Nick. The past year flashed through his mind. Sophie's late nights, the exhaustion in her voice, the time she had seemed distant. He had thought it was work stress, maybe even a failing marriage. But she had been protecting him, and he had no idea. Calloway crossed his arms. We were planning to wrap the case soon, but then Moretti changed his usual patterns. He started asking questions, getting paranoid. Nick exhaled sharply. So what happens now? Calloway's eyes darkened. Now? We need to get you somewhere safe. Nick's breath hitched. Safe? Sophie's voice was tight. Moretti might already suspect me, Nick. And if he does, you're in danger. Nick's world tipped further. 1 second, he thought he was confronting a cheating wife. The next, he was being told his life was at risk from a man he didn't even know existed. Calloway pulled a phone from his pocket, making a quick call. We're moving him now, he said to whoever was on the other end. Then he turned to Nick. Pack what you need. We leave in 10 minutes. Nick stood frozen, struggling to catch up. I have a job, a life. I can't just disappear. Sophie touched his arm. Nick, please. You have to trust me. He pulled away. That's the problem, Sophie. I don't know if I can. A knock at the door made them all tense. Calloway moved fast, drawing a gun from his holster as he stepped forward. Who is it? Silence. Nick's heart pounded as Calloway signaled for them to stay back. The detective opened the door an inch, peering outside. A beat passed, then he turned back to them. We have to move. Now! Nick swallowed the lump in his throat, knowing that whatever was outside that door was about to change his life forever. Nick's pulse thundered as Calloway shut the door and locked it. The detective's jaw tightened as he turned to Sophie. We don't have time, he said. Moretti must have figured it out. We need to move. Sophie's face had gone pale, but she nodded. Where are we going? Calloway pulled out his phone and sent a quick message. Safe house. We have an extraction team waiting a few blocks away. But we need to leave now. Nick took a shaky breath. A safe house. Extraction team? This was insane. Just hours ago, he had thought his biggest problem was a cheating wife. Now he was being forced into hiding because a dangerous criminal might be after him. I don't even know what I'm supposed to do, he admitted. I don't even know who I'm supposed to trust. Sophie turned to him, her expression raw. Nick, I know I've lied to you, but please believe me when I say that I only did it to keep you safe. Nick searched her face, looking for any flicker of the woman he had thought he knew. But there was so much he hadn't seen, so much she had hidden. He wanted to believe her. He just wasn't sure if he could. A sudden, heavy knock on the door shattered the moment. Calloway snapped his gun up. He motioned for both of them to stay quiet as he crept toward the peephole. He tensed. Who is it? Nick whispered. Calloway didn't answer right away. Then, in a low voice, he said, It's one of Moretti's guys. Nick's stomach dropped. Sophie stiffened. How many? Calloway glanced again. At least 2. Armed. Nick exhaled sharply. So, what do we do? Calloway's fingers flexed around the grip of his gun. We can go out the front. We take the fire escape. He moved fast, ushering them toward the window. Sophie yanked it open, and the cold night air rushed in. Nick's heart pounded as he climbed onto the metal landing, the city lights stretching out beneath them. Calloway followed, pulling the window shut behind them. Move quickly, stay quiet. They descended cautiously, the old metal stairs creaking under their weight. Nick's breath came fast and shallow. He was not built for this. He was an accountant, not some action hero in a spy movie. But now, his life depended on every step he took. A voice echoed from above. "They're gone." Nick's heart lurched. They had been spotted. "Go, go," Calloway hissed. They took the last few steps in a frantic rush, feet hitting the pavement just as shouts erupted from above. Nick risked a glance upward. Two men leaned over the railing, one raising a gun. "Move!" Calloway barked. They sprinted into the alley, weaving between dumpsters and shadows. The sound of footsteps pounded behind them. A gunshot cracked the air, hitting a metal pipe just inches from Nick's head. He stumbled but kept running. A black SUV screeched to a stop at the alley's exit. The passenger door flew open. "Get in," someone yelled. Calloway shoved Sophie forward. "Go." Nick barely had time to register what was happening before he was thrown into the back seat. The SUV sped off, tires screeching as bullets ricocheted off the pavement behind them. For a moment, silence settled over the car, save for their heavy breathing. Then, the driver spoke, his voice grim. "That was close." Nick looked up, recognizing the man behind the wheel. Agent Tyler Mason, another cop Sophie had never mentioned before. Sophie's hands trembled as she ran them through her hair. "How bad is it?" she asked Mason. Mason exhaled. "Worse than we thought. Moretti's people have eyes all over the city. We need to disappear fast." Nick clenched his jaw. "Where exactly are you taking us?" Calloway turned in his seat. "To a secure location. No phones, no outside contact." Nick let out a hollow laugh. "So I just dropped my entire life overnight? Just like that?" Sophie's voice was quiet. "It's the only way to keep you alive." Nick looked at her, then really looked at her. There was pain in her eyes, regret, and something else, determination. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Fine, but this isn't over." Calloway gave him a sharp nod. "It never is." The city lights faded behind them as the SUV sped toward the unknown. The SUV sped down the deserted highway, the hum of the engine the only sound in the otherwise tense silence. Nick sat in the back, staring at the blurred city lights fading into the distance. His mind was a storm, his emotions tangled between disbelief, anger, and something dangerously close to fear. Sophie sat beside him, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her jacket. Calloway and Mason remained in the front, scanning the dark roads ahead. Every mile they put between themselves and Moretti's men felt like borrowed time. Nick finally broke the silence. "How long are we supposed to disappear for?" Calloway glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "As long as it takes." Nick scoffed. "That's not an answer." Sophie turned to him, her voice soft but urgent. "Nick, this isn't just about keeping you safe. It's about taking Moretti down. He's bigger than you know, bigger than I knew when I started this operation. The people he works with, they don't leave loose ends." Nick clenched his fists. "And that's supposed to make me feel better? That my entire life was a lie? That my wife has been playing undercover agent while I've been living in complete ignorance?" Sophie's eyes filled with regret. "I never wanted to lie to you, but I didn't have a choice." Nick shook his head. "You had a choice. You just didn't trust me enough to make the right one." Before Sophie could respond, Mason's voice cut through the tension. "We've got company." Nick turned sharply to see headlights approaching fast in the rearview mirror. The glow of multiple vehicles closing in sent a bolt of adrenaline through his veins. "Moretti's men?" Sophie asked, already reaching for the gun holstered beneath her jacket. "Who else?" Calloway muttered. "They must have tracked us." Nick's breath hitched as Mason gritted his teeth and slammed his foot on the gas. The SUV roared forward, tires screeching as it swerved into the next lane. But the pursuing cars weren't slowing down. Gunfire erupted. Bullets ripped through the night, shattering the back window. Nick ducked instinctively as glass sprayed over him. His heart pounded, his instincts screaming at him to run. But there was nowhere to go. Calloway pulled out his gun and twisted in his seat. "We need to end this now." Sophie moved fast, rolling down her window and aiming at the pursuing car. A deafening shot rang out. The bullet struck one of the tires of the lead vehicle, sending it skidding off the road in a violent spiral. But two more remained. Mason took a sharp turn, heading toward an abandoned industrial zone. "Hold on," he yelled, yanking the wheel hard. The SUV swerved, barely avoiding a collision with a rusted-out truck left in the middle of the road. Nick grabbed the door handle to steady himself. "Are we just going to keep running?" Calloway snapped. "Unless you've got a better idea?" Nick's mind raced. "What about setting a trap? They expect us to keep fleeing. What if we turn the tables?" Sophie and Calloway exchanged a look. Mason's knuckles tightened on the wheel. "There's an old warehouse up ahead. We can use the structure as cover. Force them into a bottleneck." Calloway nodded. "That might just work." Mason gunned the engine, heading toward the looming silhouette of the abandoned warehouse. The SUV skidded to a stop inside the vast, darkened space. Sophie checked her gun. "Nick, stay low and stay out of sight." Nick gritted his teeth. "Not a chance. I'm done sitting on the sidelines." Sophie hesitated, then nodded. There was no time to argue. The first car screeched to a stop just outside the warehouse. Armed men emerged, their silhouettes stark against the night sky. A voice rang out. "You can't run forever, Sophie." Nick felt the cold grip of fear tightening around his chest as he recognized the voice. It wasn't just any of Moretti's men. It was Moretti himself. Sophie tensed beside him. "Nick, listen to me." But Nick was already standing, stepping out from cover. He had spent the last few hours running, doubting, fearing for his life. But now, standing in front of the man who had turned his world upside down, something inside him snapped. "I'm done running," he said, his voice unwavering. "Let's end this." Moretti smiled, slow and predatory. "That's the spirit." The warehouse fell into a tense silence, the air thick with the promise of violence. And then, all hell broke loose.